Come closer, you've felt it, haven't you? That subtle shift, the whisper of wrongness. Tonight, we begin a story where up and down lose meaning, where the ground betrays you. Like and subscribe, join us in shadows. Our story begins with Elias Vance. Elias Vance, a name built on stability. Today, atop Zenith Tower, he felt it, not wind. Concrete felt fluid. Building tilted, then snapped back. A feeling he couldn't shake. The first tremor in his ordered world. He dismissed it, of course. Long week, late nights, tired. Mind plays tricks, doesn't it? But Elias knew this was different, not fatigue. A deeper, chilling wrongness that defied all logic he held dear. Next morning, wrongness returned. Elias sat at his pristine kitchen counter, his coffee mug set down just so, slowly, imperceptibly, slid an inch across the granite, then stopped. No vibration, just impassable movement. Elias stared, ran finger over counter. Smooth, dry, no logical reason, picked up cup, set it down, nothing, tried to shake it off. But that slow, unbidden slide lingered, a splinter under his skin, unsettling. Later, in the polished steel elevator, it happened again. Not a lurch, a fleeting sensation of absolute weightlessness. For a fraction of a second, his feet lifted, stomach lurched, then gravity reasserted itself with a jolt. Caught his reflection. For a blink, his face elongated, stretched as if through warped glass. Then gone, features sharp. Was he seeing things? Was the city or his mind playing cruel tricks? Reality blurred. Elias, a man built on predictable physics, found himself unsettled. These were not random, too precise, defying logic. World felt, wobbly, his foundation shaking. A silent alarm blared in his mind. Something was deeply wrong. Returned to office, desperate for answers, pulled out sensitive instruments, calibrated, recalibrated, checked buildings' foundations. Everything, absolutely everything, was perfect. No fault. The data lied, he knew it. Numbers didn't lie, his buildings solid, unmoving, yet his senses screamed a different truth. An invisible threat, a betrayal of reality. What would you trust? Your eyes or cold, hard facts? Elias felt adrift. Unease grew, a cold tendril wrapping around his heart. Walked differently, testing each step, as if ground might give way. City, once order, now felt like precarious balancing act, ready to topple at any moment. Then he noticed it in others. Woman clutching lamppost too tightly, man stumbling on flat pavement, children with strange, frantic energy. They didn't know why, but their bodies reacted. A shared struggle. Not overt, no one falling, but collective, imperceptible shift. Subtle tension, quick glance at ground. As if they too felt worlds subtly swaying, fighting to maintain balance unconsciously. A silent struggle. They masked it well, these citizens. Quick hand to wall. Sudden stop to tie shoelace not loose. Ordinary movements that, under Elias's paranoid eye, revealed deeper, shared disquiet. A quiet terror spreading. Elias felt cold dread deep in his bones. He, master of stability, was losing his own. Worse, he saw it happening to everyone. Silent epidemic, twisting perception of grounded. Was he going mad? Late one evening, Elias sat in apartment. Silence heavy, dismissed assistant, unwilling to share terror. Poured water, hand steady, desperate attempt to cling to normalcy. The quiet was unnerving. He was alone. Gaze fell upon ornate grandfather clock on mantle, heavy antique, gift from father. Symbol of permanence, gravity's unyielding pull, stood there unmoving for decades, solid, unbreakable, until now. And then Elias saw it, not a tremor. Clark, that behemoth of brass and wood, began to lift, slowly, imperceptibly, then with sickening, graceful ascent, rose an inch, then two, floating in air. Elias stared, breath caught. Mind screamed denial. Impossible. Defied everything he knew, everything he built his life upon. Eyes refused to comprehend. Was he dreaming? Was he finally breaking? A living nightmare unfolding. Clark continued silent, impossible ascent. 3 inches, 4, spun slightly, a slow, macabre dance. Pendulum hung still, suspended, mocking physics. World tearing itself apart, piece by piece, utter unreality. Then, with sudden, horrifying lurch, invisible force let go. Clark plunged, not straight down, but with sickening, diagonal trajectory, slammed into floorboards with deafening, splintering crash. Shattered. Illusion of controlled world, precise reality, shattered with it. Clark, once order, now broken fragments. Testament to chaos invading home, mind. What would you do when your world becomes a lie, when sanity slips? Silence that followed, not empty, filled with ringing in ears, frantic heart, cold, undeniable truth, not fatigue, not trick of light. This was real, and it was terrifying, pure, unadulterated horror. New fear settled upon him, not of a monster, but of ground beneath feet, air he breathed, reality itself turning against him. Fear that up and down no longer fixed points, but treacherous concepts. Looked at apartment, solid walls, furniture. Now saw them differently. Temporary illusions held by fragile, failing magic. What if next time not just Clark? What if building? What if him? And what if you are next? The deafening crash of the grandfather clock echoed in Elias's ears. Splintered wood and twisted brass lay on the floor, a monument to the impossible. His mind reeled. This wasn't a trick of light or a tired brain. This was real, and it was terrifying. His ordered world had just been smashed to pieces. He knelt, fingers brushing against the cold, broken pieces. He tried to pick up a heavy brass gear. It felt wrong, not heavy enough. For a moment, it seemed to float, light as a feather, before settling back into his palm with a jolt. His breath caught. What was happening to the very weight of things? The next morning, the strangeness followed him to work. He unrolled a blueprint, a precise diagram of a skyscraper. As he laid it flat, the paper seemed to breathe. It undulated, a subtle wave passing through the lines and numbers, a tremor, but not of the earth, of the paper itself. He paced his office, trying to steady himself. The floor, a perfectly level expanse of marble, felt strange beneath his feet. A subtle incline, then a decline, as if he was walking on a gently rolling ship, not solid ground. His equilibrium was betraying him. His own senses were lying. He looked out his window at the city he helped build. Skyscrapers, once symbols of permanence, now seemed to lane, then straighten, then lean again. A fleeting, nauseating sway that only he seemed to perceive. Was the city itself becoming fluid? Was his mind finally snapping? Desperate, Elias began to search, not in engineering journals, but in forgotten corners of the city library. Old books, obscure archives. He found mentions of ground whispers, spatial disturbances, ancient folklore dismissed as superstition, but they spoke of a world that twisted. The text spoke of places where the earth itself felt alive, shifting beneath people's feet, where objects would become impossibly heavy or float away. Spatial dislocations, they called them. Elias, the man of logic, scoffed, yet a cold dread settled in his stomach. It sounded too familiar. He walked the city streets, every step a test. The world felt like a constant struggle for balance. He saw cracks in the pavement that seemed to widen and shrink. Buildings appeared to breathe, their rigid lines softening, then hardening. Was he seeing what the old texts described? Back in his lab, he ran tests. Leveling instruments, gyroscopes, all of them gave conflicting readings, impossible values. The bubble in the spirit level danced erratically, refusing to settle. The laws of physics, his bedrock, seemed to be mocking him. What would you do if gravity stopped listening? He tried to rationalize faulty equipment, stress, lack of sleep, but the physical world kept betraying him. His own body felt like a perpetually falling object, struggling to find a fixed point. The ground beneath him, once so certain, had become a cruel, shifting illusion. His grip tightened on the edge of his drafting table. He needed order. He craved stability. But the table itself seemed to subtly vibrate, a low hum resonating through the wood. A pencil, left forgotten, slowly rolled off the edge, falling with a strangely delayed thud. The air itself felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence. He heard faint whispers like air currents, but they seemed to pull at him, tugging at his balance. The quiet hum of the building shifted, rising and falling, as if the very structure was breathing or struggling. He poured a glass of water, hoping for a moment of calm, but the water in the glass rippled, disturbed by an unseen force. It swirled, a tiny, perfect vortex forming, then vanishing, a miniature eddy right on his desk. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The subway ride was a nightmare. The train swayed, but the tracks themselves seemed to undulate, rising and falling. The other passengers swayed too, their faces masked by a shared, subtle struggle for balance. Elias saw it now. The world was truly shifting for everyone. He saw a lamppost on the street. It seemed to lean, then correct itself, a subtle, impossible dance. He blinked, but the world didn't snap back to normal. The leaning was real. The city was moving around him, a silent, monstrous entity he couldn't grasp. Then the eddy's influence became undeniably external. He saw a man walking down the street. The man stumbled, and for a horrifying second, his shadow seemed to stretch, not on the ground, but up the side of a building, impossibly long. The man himself seemed to elongate, his body briefly angled upwards, as if walking up the side of the building. A fleeting, impossible ascent, defying all logic. Elias froze, a gasp caught in his throat. This was no longer just his perception. Then, with a sickening lurch, the invisible force released him. The man collapsed, disoriented, back to the sidewalk, sprawling onto the concrete. He lay there, dazed, shaking his head. He didn't understand what happened, but Elias did, and the truth was far worse than madness. His heart pounded. This was not internal, this was real, an external force twisting the very fabric of space. The ground whispers of ancient texts, the spatial disturbances, they weren't folklore, they were warnings. And Elias, the man of reason, was now caught in their grip. The city, once his masterpiece of order, was becoming a death trap. Every step felt like a gamble. Every building, a potential tumbling hazard. The very air around him felt heavy, alive, with an unseen, predatory force. What if the next time it wasn't just a shadow? His mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. a scientific anomaly, a seismic event, but the movements were too precise, too deliberate, too focused on disorientation. It felt like something was playing with reality, something intelligent, something ancient. Sleep offered no escape. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, which seemed to subtly undulate like a surface of water. His body felt light, then impassably heavy, as if gravity itself was fluctuating, teasing him. He felt perpetually falling, even when lying still. He thought of the grandfather clock, shattered on his floor, a memory that felt more like a nightmare, the way it had floated, spun, then plunged. This gravitational eddy, as the old texts called it, was not just a force. It was a sentient distortion. It was playing with them. The city around him was no longer just unstable. It was alive, a hungry, twisting entity using the very ground as its weapon. It warped perception, stole balance, and slowly, surely stripped away sanity. The world was no longer objective. It was a terrifying, inescapable illusion. He looked at the towering structures he had built, symbols of his life's work. Now they seemed to shimmer, their reflections in a puddle on the ground, appearing completely upside down, defying reality. And as he watched, a faint, low hum resonated from the very foundations of the city, growing louder, and he felt the ground beneath him begin to slowly, unmistakably tilt. The ground beneath him tilted, not a tremor, but a slow, undeniable shift. Elias gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white. His apartment, once a sanctuary of order, now felt like a ship caught in a silent, endless storm. The world was not just swaying, it was warping, subtly, maliciously, beneath his feet. Walking became a nightmare. Every step was a battle against unseen forces. The floor would rise like a hill, then drop like a sudden valley. It was a constant struggle for balance, a desperate dance on an invisible, shifting deck. His mind screamed for solid ground. His own home, the place he knew best, was now a funhouse of impassable angles. Walls seemed to undulate, breathing subtly. Furniture shifted, ever so slightly, marking his sense of stable geometry. It was a silent, maddening assault on his most basic perceptions. A deep, churning nausea settled in, a constant companion. It wasn't just motion sickness. It was the sickening feeling of reality itself coming undone. His stomach reeled, his head swam. This was more than disorientation. It was a physical manifestation of the world's betrayal. He tried to walk in a straight line, a simple act, now impossible. His body swayed, pulled by unseen currents. He felt like a puppet, its strings manipulated by an invisible hand. What would you do if your own body refused to obey the laws of physics? His own body felt alien, a vessel perpetually off balance. Every muscle tensed, fighting for equilibrium that no longer existed. He felt like he was falling, even when standing still. The ground was no longer a friend, but a cruel, shifting enemy. He looked at his grandest designs, blueprints of towering skyscrapers. Once symbols of stability, now they seemed to mock him. The precise lines on the paper appeared to ripple, the angles subtly shifting. His life's work, a testament to order, was being unmade. From his window, the city skyline pulsed with an unseen sickness. His own buildings, once so solid, now seemed to sway, then straighten, then sway again. A silent, nauseating dance that only he seemed to truly grasp. The city was a living nightmare. The geometric precision he lived by was marked by invisible forces. Right angles seemed curved, straight lines bent. The very concept of level became a joke. His world, once a grid of predictable physics, was now a terrifying, fluid canvas. Sensory overload set in, a relentless assault. The constant nausea was joined by blinding headaches, a pounding behind his eyes that never stopped. Every sound seemed too loud, every light too bright. His mind was fraying at the edges. The world spun, even when he was perfectly still. It was an internal vertigo, a deep-seated disequilibrium that eroded his sanity. He closed his eyes, but the sensation persisted, a relentless, sickening whirl that never ceased. Desperate, he pulled out his most sensitive instruments. Levels, gyroscopes, laser measures. He needed data, hard facts to fight this madness. He needed something to prove his senses were lying, that the world was still sane. But the instruments yielded impossible readings. The bubble in his spirit level danced erratically, refusing to settle in the center. Laser lines bent. Gyroscopes spun wildly, reporting impossible angles. The numbers screamed chaos. He recalibrated, retested, again and again. Each time, the same broken data, the same impossible values. His hands shook as he stared at the digital readouts, numbers that defied all known physics, all logical explanation. What was he fighting? The readings confirmed it. The very foundation of physics was breaking down. Gravity, mass, equilibrium, they were no longer fixed laws, but fluid suggestions. The bedrock of objective reality, the comfort he found in logic, was crumbling. Could he still trust his own senses if they lied like this? If the very tools of truth betrayed him, was he going mad, or was the world itself fracturing? The line between reality and nightmare blurred, dissolving into a terrifying unknown. Then a new, chilling realization. The eddy wasn't just an external force twisting the world around him. It was something deeper, more insidious. He felt a cold, creeping dread spread through his very core. The horror was closer than he thought. A powerful internal lurch. Not a physical blow, but a sickening twist from within. It felt like his very organs were shifting, sliding, being pulled in impossible directions. A profound, visceral horror that stole his breath. It was as if an invisible hand reached inside him, twisting his guts, pulling at his bones. A sensation of being wrung out, like a wet cloth. His body, once predictable, was now a battlefield of unseen, internal forces. Overwhelming fear, pure and primal, surged through him. This wasn't just his perception or the city's structure. This was happening to him, to his very being. The terror of his own body betraying him was absolute. The nausea intensified, a violent wave that rose from deep within. It wasn't just the external world spinning, it was his own internal compass, his very sense of self being ripped apart. He gagged, his throat burning. He crumpled to the floor, clutching his stomach, gasping for air that felt heavy and thin. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest. He was adrift, unmoored, not just in space, but within his own flesh. The gravitational eddy wasn't just outside, it was inside him. It had found its way into his very essence, twisting his perception, his balance, and now his own body. He was no longer safe, not even within himself. He lay there, broken, mind reeling. The meticulous structural engineer, master of stability, was a perpetually falling, disoriented shell. His body, once a predictable machine, was now a vessel of constant, internal terror. The world was no longer just shifting. It was actively twisting, from the ground beneath him to the very core of his being. And as he lay there, a faint, rhythmic thrumming began, resonating deep in his bones, a new, terrifying heartbeat of the eddy, pulling him deeper into its warped geometry. The rhythmic thrumming Elias felt deep in his bones now vibrated through the very floorboards of his apartment. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a low, constant hum, a new heartbeat for a world that was rapidly turning against him. The city outside his window seemed to breathe, its hard edges softening, its familiar geometry beginning to blur. The transformation was swift, insidious. Objects once solid now held no predictable weight. A heavy trash can on the street outside his building suddenly felt light as air, tipping over with a slow, sickening grace, then crashing with unnatural force. The world was playing a cruel game with gravity. In the grocery store, a simple shopping cart became a hazard. Oranges, meant to be heavy, floated free, bumping against the ceiling. Bottles of milk, usually light, felt like lead, crushing the bread beneath them. Every errand was now a terrifying gamble. What would you do if your everyday world became a minefield of unpredictable forces? The city, once a testament to order, was now a labyrinth of impossible angles. Hallways seemed to curve where they should be straight. Floors became hills and valleys. Every step was a terrifying test of balance, a constant fight against a world that refused to stay still. Elias, the meticulous engineer, became obsessed. His apartment transformed into a desperate laboratory. He charted every minute distortion, every impossible shift, every change in weight. He scribbled notes, filled pages with frantic calculations, desperate to find a pattern, a logical explanation for the madness. His precision, once his greatest strength, twisted into a paranoid delirium. He calibrated instruments again and again, but the numbers screamed chaos. The bubble in his spirit level danced wildly, refusing to settle, mocking his desperate need for order. Logic was failing him. He spent hours in dusty libraries, seeking answers beyond science. He found ancient, esoteric texts, forgotten lore that spoke of forces beyond human comprehension. His fingers, trembling, brushed against brittle pages, fearing what he might find. And then he found it. A hidden passage detailing the gravitational eddy, not a force of nature, but an ancient, extra-dimensional entity. A sentient distortion that didn't just alter gravity, but actively twisted the very fabric of spatial orientation. The texts described it as a predator, feeding on spatial stability, deliberately warping reality. It sought to unravel the very concept of grounded, turning cities into a terrifying, fluid nightmare. Elias, the master of stability, was now facing his ultimate enemy. His mind reeled. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was deliberate, a malevolent intelligence playing with the fundamental laws of his world. The horror was not just in the shifting ground, but in the knowledge that something was doing this on purpose. Sleep offered no escape. His nights were plagued by horrifying falling sensations. He would lie in bed, rigid with terror, feeling his body plummet through an endless void. He would wake with a gasp, heart pounding, unsure if he had truly been falling or if it was just a dream. The line between awake and asleep blurred. He lost the ability to discern whether he was truly standing or perpetually falling. Every moment was a battle against an internal freefall. What would you do if you never knew if you were truly upright? The ground beneath his feet, once his most reliable constant, had become a cruel, shifting illusion. Sometimes it felt like quicksand pulling him down. Other times, it felt like he was floating, barely tethered to the earth. Even simple acts became terrifying. Water from his shower head would sometimes spray upwards, defying gravity for a moment before falling in strange, looping patterns. His morning coffee would swirl unnaturally in his mug, a miniature vortex forming and dissolving. The city outside was a nightmare playground for the eddy. Buildings stretched and compressed. Roads buckled and swayed. Every step on the pavement was a fight for balance, a desperate attempt to stay upright in a world that refused to be still. His own reflection in glass skyscrapers showed a distorted, elongated figure, stretched thin as if pulled by an unseen force. He was becoming as warped as the world around him. His body, once a predictable machine, was now a vessel of constant, internal terror. One night he stood by his window, staring out at the city lights below. They pulsed and shifted, no longer a flat, comforting grid. They began to curve, slowly, impassably, upwards. A terrifying funnel of light forming in the heart of the metropolis. Then a vast, rippling distortion began to form in the very center of the city. A shimmering vortex, a gaping maw of twisted light and shadow. It pulsed with a silent, hungry energy, drawing the very air towards its impassable center. Elias felt an irresistible pull, not just a feeling, but a physical tug, a relentless force pulling him towards the shimmering vortex. He pressed his hand against the window pane, his fingers splayed, desperate to resist. He tried to anchor himself, to grip anything solid. He grabbed his heavy drafting desk, a monolith of oak and steel. But the desk itself began to slide, scraping across the floor, pulled by the same unseen current towards the window, towards the eddy. His fingers dug into the wood, splinters piercing his skin. He gritted his teeth, a desperate animal sound escaping his throat. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest, fighting against the inevitable. But the pull intensified. His feet lifted from the floor, his body tilting, angling towards the vortex. He was floating, suspended in his own apartment, no longer in control of his own physical form. He was no longer standing, no longer falling. He was simply drifting, a puppet on invisible strings, being reeled in by the monstrous entity in the city's heart. The eddy was claiming him, piece by terrifying piece. The shimmering vortex outside grew larger, closer, its silent hum now a roar in his mind. The city lights, once distant, were now a blinding, swirling maelstrom of light and shadow, beckoning him into its impassable depths. And then, with a sickening lurch, he was pulled through the open window, headfirst into the swirling maw. The last thing he saw was his own apartment, now impassably vertical, shrinking behind him, as the hungry, twisting eddy swallowed him whole. What would you do when the very world pulls you into its terrifying, inescapable embrace? He was no longer just falling. He was falling in every direction at once. The world had swallowed him whole, a maelstrom of light and shadow, and Elias was adrift within its impassable depths. Up and down, left and right ceased to exist. He was simply there, a terrifying, inescapable embrace of pure chaos. The city around him was not just tilting now. It was a living, breathing nightmare of spatial anarchy. Buildings, once monuments of stability, now floated, detached from their foundations, or crashed with silent, impossible impacts against other structures. The very ground was a lie. People, what few survivors remained, moved like broken dolls. Some walked on walls as if they were solid ground. Others drifted upwards, then slammed down, their bodies twisting. The concept of grounded was meaningless. It was a carnival of the impossible, and every resident was a reluctant performer. Giant structures, once his pride, now swayed like drunken giants, their foundations severed. A massive concrete slab, ripped from a bridge, rotated slowly in the air, a silent, deadly ballet. The city, Elias's masterpiece, was unmaking itself, piece by horrifying piece. What would you do if the very ground beneath your feet became a cruel joke? If the air itself became a treacherous, unseen current? Elias, the engineer of order, was now trapped in a world that defied every law he knew, every principle he held dear. The eddy's internal influence intensified. Elias's body felt like a rag doll, stretched and compressed by unseen forces. His limbs elongated, then shortened, a sickening, ceaseless twisting within him. Every nerve ending screamed in protest. He was being pulled apart from the inside. His bones felt like rubber, his muscles like taffy, a profound, agonizing sensation of being wrung out relentlessly. He tried to move, but his movements were grotesque, his body refusing to obey. It was a living torture, a constant internal war against an unseen enemy. The very air around him felt alive, not with wind, but with a silent, heavy presence that pressed upon him, distorting his flesh. He gasped for breath, but his lungs felt like deflating balloons, then impossibly rigid. This was sensory horror at its purest, most intimate. He was losing himself, not just his mind, but his physical form. The constant distortion, the internal twisting, was erasing his sense of self. What is a man when his own body becomes a stranger, a vessel of unending agony? Then he saw others, survivors. Their movements were grotesque, their limbs at impossible angles, some seeming to flicker in and out of phase like a broken signal. Their sanity, like his own, was shattered by the relentless spatial assault. Their eyes, when he met them, were wide and empty, reflecting only the chaos of the world. They stared through him, not at him. Lost souls, adrift in a sea of unreality, their minds broken, their bodies mere puppets of the eddy's whims. He tried to speak, but only a strangled gurgle escaped. They didn't respond anyway. They were beyond words, beyond help, each one a mirror reflecting his own inevitable fate. The terror was contagious, a silent scream shared by all. Some wept, silent tears streaming down contorted faces, lost to their own private nightmares. Others laughed, a chilling, insane sound that echoed through the warped city, a testament to minds completely unhinged. The city was a madhouse. This was the true horror, not just the physical torment, but the utter destruction of the mind, the loss of self, of sanity, of any connection to a sane reality. Elias felt himself slipping, piece by agonizing piece. He had to fight. Driven by a desperate, final need for order, Elias fought through the disorienting city. Every step was a monumental effort, a battle against the unseen currents that pulled and pushed him. He needed to find the source. He needed to make it stop. He remembered the ancient texts, the whispers of the eddy's true nature. A forgotten chamber beneath a skyscraper rumored to be its epicenter. A place where the twisting began. He clung to that one fragile thread of logic. The pull intensified, trying to divert him, to send him spiraling into the void. But Elias pushed through, his body screaming in protest, his mind a burning ember of desperate resolve. He would impose order, even if it killed him. He crawled, he dragged himself through impassable angles and shifting surfaces. The path to the epicenter was a gauntlet of pure unreality, designed to break the will, to shatter the mind. But Elias was an engineer. He would not break. Finally, he reached it. A forgotten chamber, deep beneath a colossal skyscraper that now floated precariously above. The air here was thick, heavy with the eddy's power, a silent, vibrating hum that resonated in his very bones. He looked into the chamber and saw a vast void. Not empty space, but a swirling, formless expanse of shifting geometries, and within it, a surface, like black glass, reflecting him. But his reflection was not whole. His reflection fragmented into countless falling pieces, each shard of his image tumbling endlessly into the abyss. His face, his body, his very being, broken into a million shattered fragments, eternally falling. It was a mirror of his own disintegration, a terrifying visual of his psychological collapse. The engineer, who built stable worlds, now saw himself as a collection of perpetually falling, broken parts. The eddy was showing him his true state. He felt a profound, primal dread. This was not just a force, it was sentient. It was showing him his own undoing, and it was enjoying it. The air grew colder, the hum in his bones intensified. He was not alone in this chamber. A terrifying, voiceless sentience pulsed from the void, a presence that filled the chamber, cold and immense. It didn't speak with sound, but with pure thought, a direct invasion of his mind, stripping away his last defenses. And then the whisper, not a sound, but a direct, chilling thought, echoing in the deepest parts of his fracturing mind. You cling to order, Elias, but what is order when everything is one continuous fall? The words resonated, shaking his very soul, pulling him deeper into the abyss of unreality. He was no longer falling, he was simply undone. The eddy had swallowed Elias whole, and now his body was a plaything. It stretched him long and thin, then compressed him tight and hard. Every part of him pulled in a different way. Up and down had no meaning here. He was just a shape, constantly changing, in a terrifying, endless tumble. His limbs felt like rubber bands, snapping and stretching. His insides churned, a constant, sickening twist. He tried to fight, to make his body obey, but there was nothing to fight against. Only the invisible, relentless forces of the eddy. It was a torture without end, a physical nightmare that never stopped. His mind, once so sharp, so precise, began to fray. Memories of a stable world, of solid ground, of predictable physics, became distant whispers. They seemed silly now, like dreams from another life. Here, logic was a joke, a forgotten word in a language that no longer mattered. He remembered his buildings, his great towers reaching for the sky. Now, the idea of up was a cruel mockery. He was surrounded by a fluid, mocking reality where everything shifted, everything tumbled. His life's work, a monument to order, was now just a joke in the face of this chaos. His last bits of sanity unwound like thread from a spool. He tried to think, to hold on to a single, clear thought, but his mind was a storm. It was a constant, dizzying spin, a relentless fall into nothingness. What would you do if your own thoughts betrayed you? The eddy didn't want to kill him. It wanted something far worse. It wanted to make him part of itself, to dissolve his sense of self, to make him one with its endless, terrifying dance. He was not dying, but becoming something else entirely, something formless. His perception of objective reality, the solid ground he had always known, was melting away. It was like sand slipping through his fingers, faster and faster, until there was nothing left to hold onto. He was no longer Elias. He was just a part of the fall. He was a perpetually falling particle, aware yet helpless, trapped in the boundless, horrifying dance of the eddy. He could not move, could not speak, could not even scream, only feel the endless, disorienting descent. This was his new existence. Then a new, chilling truth dawned on him. The eddy was not confined to this city. It was merely awakening. Its influence, a cold, unseen wave, was spreading. He felt it, a subtle shift in the very fabric of the world, reaching far beyond the urban sprawl. Distant structures, far from the city, began to subtly twist. Mountains seemed to lean, ancient forests to sway in an unseen current. The earth itself was beginning to feel the eddy's touch, a silent, slow corruption of its very being. He saw it or felt it in the stars above. They seemed to fall upwards, defying everything he knew about the universe, not falling down, but rising slowly, impassibly into the void. The eddy was twisting the heavens themselves. Elias was left as pure, disembodied consciousness. No body, no weight, no form, just a mind trapped in an endless, disorienting descent. He was a thought, a feeling, a memory, forever falling in the eddy's grasp. The fall was constant, but without sensation. No wind, no speed, just the endless fact of falling. It was a torment beyond pain, a pure, unending horror of existence without anchor. What would you do if you were just a thought falling forever? The eddy was not a place, but a state of being, and Elias was its eternal prisoner. He saw the city, stretched and warped, but it was not truly there. It was a memory, a fading image in his mind, twisted by the endless fall. He felt the presence of the eddy, immense and ancient, all around him. It was not a monster with teeth, but a force that consumed reality itself, and he was now a part of its terrible, silent hunger. There was no escape, no way out, only the perpetual fall, the disorienting dance, the endless assimilation into the unreality of the eddy. This was his end. This was his beginning, a terrifying, eternal moment. The meticulous structural engineer who built stable worlds was now a fragment of chaos. His purpose, his identity, everything he was, had been stripped away. He was a testament to the fragility of objective reality. The terror was no longer a scream, but a quiet, deep understanding, a chilling acceptance of his fate. He was part of the eddy now, a tiny, conscious part of its vast, terrifying being, and it was growing. The eddy was not a sudden burst of power. It was a slow, creeping horror, a subtle shift that began almost unnoticed, a whisper of wrongness that grew into a roar, then into this silent, endless fall. Its influence was still subtle, still quiet, in places far from the city. A slight sway in a distant building, a faint hum in the ground, a feeling of unease that people would dismiss as tiredness or stress. But it was there, that subtle shift, that feeling of being off balance even when standing still, that nagging sense that something was wrong with the very ground beneath your feet. It was the eddy awakening. It was in the water that rippled without a breeze, in the objects that felt too light, then too heavy, in the way the light seemed to bend just so, making shadows dance in impossible ways. It was everywhere. Elias, the disembodied consciousness, felt it all. The spread, the awakening, the slow, insidious twisting of the world he once knew. He was a witness to the end of objective reality, trapped in its unfolding horror. His final thought, a chilling echo in the void of his endless fall, was of the world outside, the world that thought it was safe, the world that thought up and down were fixed points. Look around you now, feel that subtle shift. Perhaps you're already falling.